Okay. Well, welcome to the Gold Coast Arts. I'm Brian Gordon, the senior programmer for the Gold Coast International Film Festival, and currently the Gold Coast Cinema series via streaming, virtual cinema series. And we're very pleased to be screening currently screening the entertaining, provocative, and very informative documentary, My Darling Vivian, which takes a look at the life and overlooked influence of Johnny Cash's first wife, Vivian. And I'm very pleased to have with me for this Q&A, writer Brian Mansfield joining us from Nashville to discuss the film. And Brian is a nationally recognized music journalist and historian who has edited and authored multiple books, including Rutledge Hill Press's Ring of Fire, a tribute to Johnny Cash, and Remembering Patsy. And Brian currently writes and produces the Grand Ole Opry's Country Classics, a live performance radio broadcast staged at the Ryman, which has been staged since 2009. And if you ever find yourself in Nashville, do not miss going to the Ryman Auditorium, I should add. And he's spent 18 years as US Today's Nashville correspondent and has written for several other publications, including Variety, the Tennessean, and the Nashville Scene. So Brian, this film is nothing if not a corrective to the movie Walk the Line, and the flip side of the story of the enduring love, the love story, the promoted love story between Johnny and June Carter, and now June Carter, and of course became June Carter Cash. Right. How important is this film in that sense as a corrective measure? It's and then do we still? Can we still love Johnny Cash after seeing this film?
Well, I think so, and I think it is an important corrective. One of the things that I find really interesting about Vivian's story from the Johnny Cash myth perspective is that the exes always tended to stay in Cash's orbit in that family. So like Marty Stewart was married to one of the daughters for a while, and he was part of that for the rest of his life. Rodney Crowell was married to Roseanne for a good long while, but he was always kind of in that orbit. And so once you came into Cash's orbit, you never really left. And that's one thing that's a point that the movie makes, that Vivian stayed in love with Johnny her entire life, but for some reason she was the one ex-spouse that you never really saw, you never really heard anything about, and nobody ever really talked about.
So when you, I mean, I'm sure you've known people in your years, you've known people who knew Johnny pretty intimately. I mean, did people mention, or I don't know if you ever had the opportunity to meet Johnny yourself?
I met Johnny in June and interviewed Johnny several times. Never met Vivian, never talked to her, never really heard conversations about her unless you were dealing with the early life and early history, kind of the pre-June world of Johnny Cash. But she was, she was always somebody that stayed way in the background. And the impression that I got from reading about her and what little I did know about her was that she was, I don't think she ever saw what was going to happen to Johnny Cash when she signed on with him. I don't think she had any clue what was going to happen. I don't think she had any grounding for how to deal with that. That wasn't her life plan at all.
Right. And I think the film is also interesting because, kind of along as the film traces their marriage from the 50s into the 60s, we kind of see the effects of the times in their private life. And I'm thinking more, especially that incident with the photograph, in which suddenly she was, there was the scandal, if you want to put it that way, of her being black, and how that played out. Have you heard, how much have you heard of that? Had you heard prior to this film about that incident?
That was really probably the thing that I knew most about her, because that was a really big deal. It made it into the mainstream press. I mean, you can only imagine what kind of impact that would have had today in social media with, with all of the false messages that you get and the gaslighting. I mean, that's what was going on in the radical racist newspapers and media of the day. I mean, that was all over the KKK publications, and there were flyers and stuff like that. It was, I mean, it was a pretty horrific thing, and they really had to deal with it. But, you know, Vivian didn't really look like anybody else you ever saw. And
right.
So you can see how people that were inclined to hate would have jumped on that and done that. But that had to be just an incredibly horrifying thing to go through.
Mm-hmm. I can only imagine. It makes me think about, this film sort of makes me think in a broader sense about how, you know, the public is sold, or, you know, the different myths about, you know, different stars, and then, you know, whether it's in the music business or the film business, and, you know, what happens when sometimes the truth comes out, and you know, there's a corrective or something, or somebody comes out and, you know, who was involved with a person before, you know, a former spouse or partner, or a parent even.
Right.
And you know, I think looking at the story of June and of Johnny and June, which I think that myth, if you want to call it a myth, I think that story was told pretty successfully, especially in terms of June, you know, saying she was raising all these kids.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess my question is, I mean, how necessary or how common was that to really promote Johnny?
Well, there's a lot to that, because Johnny's myth was so big that it could sort of encompass everybody and everything. You know, because he was somebody that you could be a fervently religious person and be a Johnny Cash fan. It's kind of like Dolly Parton today. You know, everybody loves Dolly. Dolly can sort of be anything to anybody. You could be a fervent religious person and love Johnny. You could be a rock and roller or a folk singer and love Johnny. You could be hardcore country and love Johnny. You could be a progressive and I mean, he was kind of everything to all people. And so I think one of the things that I really like about this movie is that it is something that actually adds to the myth of Johnny Cash, and it fits really neatly into some of the things that we know about him, which is, like I said, you come into that world, you never really leave that world. And you certainly saw that in terms of Vivian's feelings about Johnny. You know, the other things that I think factor into that, Johnny was a very driven person. He understood the value of an image and the value of presentation. And he was not, once he got started on that path, he was not going to let anything take away from that, or at least not intentionally. You know, the drugs almost did that, but when he started that was to get him through to the next show, to help him do the things that he felt he needed to do. Another factor is that June was a fantastic storyteller. I mean, and she was a trained storyteller. June studied in New York under Lee Strasberg. Because in the mid-50s, Elia Kazan came to the Grand Ole Opry and saw June and said, "You need to go study acting." And so she did. June could have been a great comic actress, because she was hysterically funny. You know, back in the day, she was just a knockout. And so you give all that raw material from those lives to June, and June's going to turn it into a story that sounds great. And in some ways, I think June might have been the myth maker of the family.
Wow, how interesting.
Yeah, June is just as fascinating as Johnny is. June is just at least that fascinating.
Well, that's very interesting, because I know you see some of those old TV clips from the 50s, you know, when she was just starting out and singing with, you know, as part of the Carter family. I mean,
Right.
she really took over the stage and everything, just with her antics and just with her presence.
Yeah.
So that's very, very interesting to hear that. Well, getting back to Johnny, I think that was really interesting how you mentioned how much he was to everybody, whether it was, you know, whether it was a church, a religious person, or a folkie, or a rock and roller. And that was really something he apparently really cultivated very well. And it makes me think about, right at the height of his career, well, right at the very height in the late 60s, I mean, he was breaking through on the country charts, one hit after another. And there he was with Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
I thought was very interesting.
Yeah, and he's got Dylan in on the TV show. He's bringing in Ray Charles and Louis Armstrong. I want to say Stevie Wonder was on that show, but I could be wrong about that. But I know Ray Charles and Louis Armstrong were, and but he's also hanging out with Billy Graham and Richard Nixon, and he was just this sort of link between literally everybody else in the world.
Speaking, we're kind of getting on a little tangent here, but a very enjoyable one. It makes me think about when you talk about Billy Graham. There's that infamous film that he made, the Jesus movie.
Yeah, and I've never seen
I myself
that,
have never seen.
Yeah, I haven't either.
I actually have met the person who played Jesus in that film, Bob Elfstrom.
Oh wow!
But anyway, that's kind of an infamous film. If the hardcore Cash fans out there might want to find that somewhere, I have no idea where it is, or if it's on YouTube or something illegally somewhere. But you might want to take a look at that sometime, or try to look for it.
Yeah.
But getting back to my darling Vivian, it just makes me wonder when you say this. At the height of it, I just wonder how much there was a spot in his heart for Vivian, at that time when he was like really bursting through. I just wasn't quite sure from seeing that film how much there was or where that was.
Well, early on, I mean, you just look at the record of what they left behind, where there are I've heard there are as many as 10,000 letters that they wrote each other while he was stationed overseas.
Yeah.
And he left after having just barely met her in 1951 at that roller rink. And if you saw the letters, and he's singing songs for her and he's sending tape for her, which could have been the easiest thing to do at the time. So I think there was a lot there. She obviously felt strongly enough that she kind of carried a torch for him for the rest of her life. And I think you have to look at two things that happened. As much as he might have loved her, he probably loved the idea of his career more, which is fairly common, I think, with people that are that driven to be successful in their fields. And then the other thing is, once the drugs took over, definitely loved the drugs more. Mm-hmm. Because there was, at certain points there was really nothing else for him to love except the drugs, because that's just what they did.
Yeah. Again, going off on a tangent here, but I mean, people who want to do further investigation of that dark period of Johnny Cash should probably go online. I'm sure you can see it, but there's a clip of him on a show that Pete Seeger was hosting, where he did not look great with June. So not the best. It's kind of, if people are kind of interested in that whole history, and just seeing what he rebounded from, I think would find that very sadly fascinating.
Well, and there was one point in the movie where they're talking about the drugs and how he comes home and the daughters are going, my dad is not in this. And you see this picture of him, and he's gone from this very kind of robust, good-looking man to somebody that is so skinny, I almost didn't it took me a second to realize, oh, that's Johnny in that picture.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And let's talk about the ending at the Ryman. Were you there by chance?
I was not. I went to June and Johnny's funerals, and I'm not sure how I missed that show, because I remember that show, but I did not attend.
But that was pretty heartbreaking. I think that especially when Rodney's shout out got edited out, and I guess that was just kind of a heartbreaking end to it all in a way.
Well, and it is. It's one of those things that shows you how much complexity there is to any person and to their relationships over the course of their life, because Johnny and June was a great love story. And it was the love story that lasted. It was the love story that was there at the end of the life. But it wasn't the only one. She probably did save his life. I don't know. I don't know that Vivian was in a position to have been able to do that because of the history and the baggage there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those things are true. At the same time, it's also true that that June was having an affair with a married man, and most people in her circle knew that that's exactly what she was doing. There is very strong indication that at one point, while Johnny was with June, he had an affair with her sister, Anita. So, I mean, so there was a lot going on there. I'm sure that over the course of the years that they knew each other, they were not the only people that they had affairs with. And Johnny, at his worst, could be a really bad guy. The years that he was taking drugs, he was not somebody you could trust. He was not making good decisions. There were plenty of times when there was no good reason for him to be alive. But at the same time, I think that by the end of his life, there was some wisdom, there was some commitment, there was some consistency that just wasn't there from like 1956 to about 1968.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I think we've covered a lot here, and I think if for those who've seen the film, I hope this conversation was pretty enlightening, and we've got on the Gold Coast International Film Festival website, we've got Brian's social contacts. After hearing him, I'm sure you might follow some of his writing and follow him on Twitter. Brian, are you working on anything in particular right now, or any big project?
Not anything really big that I can talk about. My passion project these days is a Facebook page that I have called the Nashville Musical History Tour, where I'm kind of retelling the stories about Nashville music through the locations where they happen. So it's like, where this song was written, or where this person grew up, or they got married, or they had a wreck, and so it's just taking you through all of these different places in Nashville and going, okay, I bet you didn't know that Friends in Low Places was written there.
Ha, that's great. It's up now or no?
Yes. I launched it in January, so there are dozens of stories and places. So if you ever come to Nashville, it's a great thing to go through so that you can kind of map out where you want to go and go, oh, okay, right at this corner. This was the corner where Johnny Cash got arrested for public drunkenness in 1965, or this is the place where he lived and the house burned down, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's like some kind of, I remember you talking about this once before. There was actually I know the corner of Franklin Road and I think 21st is where Roy Orbison wrote Pretty Woman. Is that?
Yeah, and I've heard Rodney Crowell tell that story, and I've heard a lot of people tell that, and I haven't written about that because I think there are competing stories, one that has him writing it there, and one that has him writing it like up north of town around Gallatin or Goodlettsville, near where the Monument Records office was. And I haven't been able to lock that one down, and it's driving me crazy because I really want it to be at that corner. Because what's interesting about that corner is I have confirmed that on the other side of the street is the place where Dolly Parton met her husband the day that she moved to town.
Oh,
and that building is gone, but I was able to lock that in because I wrote about it and posted it on Facebook. And then I think it was the daughter of the guy that owned the laundromat posted about it, and she was like, yes, this was my dad, and we used to give Dolly a ride home in the rain if she came to do her laundry and it started raining. And so just all kinds of stuff like that. I'm having a blast. It's called the Nashville Musical History Tour.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I'm going to that page as soon as we get off here.
Great.
But Brian, well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I think it's been very enlightening, and we appreciate that you took the time to do that.
Absolutely. I was thrilled to get a chance to watch the movie and learn more about Vivian's story because, like I said, I didn't know as much about it as I wish I had.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank everyone for joining us, and remember to support the Gold Coast Arts Center. It's a very important time to do that right now, and we hope to see you at the movies as we continue our streaming series right now. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you.